Good morning. I'm Alex Mozet, and we're here on Winner Take All, where we talk about the constant battle between large tech monopolies and traditional incumbents, and just trying to make sense of the whole situation, which is an ongoing battle. I'm joined here by Nick Johnson, co-author with me on the book Modern Monopolies. And so let's jump right into it. Stars Group. Stars Group, TSG is the ticker. They were in Platt, the ETF. Their stock, you look here, is up now over 30% this morning on news that they are merging with a company called Flutter. Flutter somewhat recently changed their name from like Paddy Book. It's based out
Paddy
of
Power.
Paddy Power,
Yeah.
out of Ireland, I think. We had looked at them for the ETF, but they are listed as an OTC stock.
They also have majority linear revenue, I believe. So they have a lot of sports book betting, basically, and stuff that's on their own book, linear revenue. They don't have as much platform revenue as Stars Group does with PokerStars.
Yep. So you can see here the news. So Paddy Book, did I get it right?
Paddy Power.
Paddy Power bought FanDuel last year for $500 million, but they do linear sports betting, as Nick was just talking about. And PokerStars is owned by Stars Group. Stars Group owns a variety of different things. We spoke about Stars Group a couple weeks ago, striking a deal with Fox to integrate media and sports betting more closely together. So they struck a $12 billion deal here to create the world's biggest online betting group. So what is the platform dynamic in this? As Nick was alluding to, Flutter, when you are providing betting services and you are using your own balance sheet to essentially facilitate that bet, right? You are the bookie and then people are taking bets out. That's linear. That doesn't actually qualify as a platform business model. So what is the platform dynamic here of just say Stars Group? And then we can talk about FanDuel.
Yeah, well, Stars Group has PokerStars, which is all basically peer-to-peer betting. You're playing against other people playing poker. Pretty straightforward. You've got a bunch of players sitting at a table playing against each other and betting money. Someone wins, someone loses. So that's what we would call social gaming platform, and that makes up, if I remember right, the lion's share of their revenue. It's they're basically the biggest poker platform in the world, I think, by some margin at this point.
Yep.
So that's a pretty big driver for them.
All these brand names, right? If you play like Full Tilt, Sky Bet, PokerStars, these are all part of the Stars Group portfolio here. So FanDuel similarly has a platform dynamic around fantasy sports betting, and that kind of sports oriented betting, similar to the PokerStars platform dynamic.
So FanDuel, basically, you're playing against other people. They call it technically not gambling. It's a game of skill. But basically what you're doing is trying to predict certain outcomes related to fantasy sports and and there's a lot of different permutations of it. But you're playing against other players and some of you win and some of you lose. And it's a similar kind of social gaming platform dynamic.
Now, fun little tidbit of information. So you may say, oh, FanDuel, the founders are getting rich off of this deal. Wrong. FanDuel had been valued at over $1 billion. The investors then outranked the minority shareholders being the founders, to sell it last year to Paddy Poker. I'm just not remembering this name today. Whatever. It's now called Flutter.
Flutter. Let's go with that.
It's no longer Paddy. You can see why they changed the name because no one remembers the name. Flutter is much better. So anyway, they sold it to Flutter last year, took a huge haircut, sold it for $465 million. It was valued at over $1 billion. Basically, the founders got crammed down and their equity was basically worth nothing.
Founders and early employees didn't get, I think, anything. I think current executives and later stage investors and investors that had a priority did okay.
They put in $416 million in as investment, and it was sold for $465. So basically scraped
not a great
$50 million more than how much money was actually put into the business.
So let's talk about why that is, though. There's FanDuel and there's poker and
DraftKings.
DraftKings are the two big fantasy sports DraftKings, they're both predominantly in the U.S., if not entirely, and DraftKings is, by all the numbers we've seen, much bigger. DraftKings, I believe, still an independent company.
Mm-hmm.
They have the latest numbers I saw. I think they have about 10 million. They claim they have more than 10 million users. What is defined as a user, not exactly clear. Whereas the numbers I found on FanDuel said they had 6 million registered users. Of course, that's not active users, which indicates to me that DraftKings is probably significantly larger than FanDuel. So you have that winner-take-all dynamic happening here, which isn't a surprise, looking at the kind of platform dynamic going on. And with that, you've got a dominant player, DraftKings, and FanDuel is still a distant number 2. One of the interesting things about this deal, though, is because Stars Group has that tie-up with Fox, part of what is in this deal is that Fox, I think in 2021 or somewhere around there, has the option to take like an 18% stake in FanDuel at a set price, basically. So they have a lot of incentive to try to push FanDuel through their media channels to get more business through FanDuel and help grow that business if it does, because then they can take a big equity stake and make a big profit from doing that.
So, it's interesting. DraftKings raised pretty much double the amount of money that FanDuel did.
Right.
It was rumored that DraftKings is trying to raise more money now at least a $2 billion valuation. Obviously, this is now just going to put a lot of increased pressure on DraftKings, where you have the roll up on the kind of poker betting side of the arena, the traditional linear sports book betting. Now you have the fantasy sports platform betting model. And then you have the distribution from Fox, all rolled up into this one company.
Right.
Which is why, you see Stars Group stock up over 30% today. All of that just putting a lot of pressure on DraftKings. It'll be interesting to see what they're able to do. And the valuation that I think they had previously tried to raise at is now certainly going to come under a lot of pressure.
I think the other piece of it is, what do the other big gaming companies do? How do they respond to this? Because if you've got this big dominant online competitor, which is trying to grow fantasy sports and is now going to be super dominant in poker and doing very well also in sports betting. Well, and how do you respond? What can you do to respond to that?
Penn National, which owns actual physical casinos. That was what we spoke about a few weeks ago in regards to the Stars Group partnering up with those guys to do a partnership there. And so now you could kind of get access to the US markets and all these kinds of So yeah, I really like what the company is doing. I think you're starting to see, again, the winner take all dynamic just playing itself out here. Naturally, if the platform is not able to get to the winner take all dynamic just on their own, then you're going to see companies merge and consolidate and come together to rip out cost and just compound those network effects. So now let's look at PetSmart. So BC Partners, private equity firm, bought PetSmart in 2015, right? PetSmart, leading bricks and mortar specialty retailer, 1,600 plus stores. And they took the company private, BC Partners and some limited partners here. Okay. Then a couple of years later, they go buy Chewy for about $3.3 billion. Chewy being the leading linear e-commerce pet store in the market. Basically now bringing the leading retail brick and mortar pet store with the leading e-commerce pet store into one.
Yep.
Lots of analysts and skeptics said, this doesn't make any sense. Why would they go and do this? Clearly, we've seen in the past few years subsequent to that roll up that I think actually Chewy has just operated quite independently from PetSmart. I don't even know if there's been too much synergy. I think PetSmart was able to help capitalize the business, help Chewy kind of continue to focus on growth, bring some capital to the table in the transaction. And I think just the pet industry in general has done very well for itself.
I think part of the rationale of the acquisition was PetSmart's private equity owners were looking at their business and said, we need to do e-commerce. we can't build it ourselves. It's too late, and we have too many problems going on with the real estate and the core business and all those typical retail problems that we've talked about a lot on the show. So they said, all right, let's go buy this so we can own some of that growth. It was definitely a kind of bet the company type move. It has paid off pretty well, at least in the short term for them.
They lay out the theses. Here's the PetSmart investment thesis. Okay. And then here's the Chewy investment thesis. You read through these bullets. The last bullet kind of touches on synergies and basically just says they can partner up in vendor negotiations and have more leverage with vendors. That's it. So I think really it was just they had a good read on the industry and they said there's a huge growth area here in e-com. They clearly seen how effective Chewy was in e-com relative to what PetSmart was trying to do and not doing well. And they made a good bet. Now they spun out Chewy back into a public company. Right. PetSmart also a public company now. And they spun out Chewy as a public company. They own 70% of Chewy.
Roughly after the IPO, yeah.
Roughly. And Chewy is currently worth about $9 billion market cap on the public stock market. So do the math. Basically, BC Partners from the $3.3 billion roughly doubled that money in what their ownership stake is worth today in Chewy. By all measures, a fantastic investment, basically over 2 years, doubling a few $1 billion. Pretty good return. Interestingly enough, you say, is there any platform dynamic here? And the answer is no. As you can see here from the synergy bullet, vendor negotiations, that spells linear. That spells I am buying products from manufacturers or from distributors, buying them, putting them on my balance sheet, and then reselling them again. I've actually spoken to the PetSmart CEO about this and said, hey, would you ever think about letting third-party sellers come and sell on, and open up a marketplace on Chewy and get network effects and get a wider assortment of inventory? Because Chewy doesn't have every product that Amazon has for pets. It's just a much more curated experience. Right. There's much more tightly tailored to that buying experience.
They're very big on customer service and, we can help you find the right product. And it's more of a kind of value-added service model in combination with e-commerce. And there's also been, I think, over the last few years, a lot more focus. I can tell you this as a pet owner. Pet safety, quality products, and Chewy has definitely played into that, I think, pretty well to build, for now, a loyal audience. I think the challenge for them long term is how do you avoid commoditization over the long term and compete with some of these marketplace companies?
Yeah, it's kind of like, if you're buying a toy, I've got a 15-month puppy, and you say, well, is this toy pet safe? Am I going to know that if you chew through the thing, like he loves to chew through everything, could that actually harm him? Because it's kind of like a kid, right? And you don't want to put things in front of the kid that could hurt him or kill him or, anything like that. So I think that's where this linear dynamic, to your point, is definitely starting to play out with safety, with just a more regulated, curated product environment actually resonating with customers clearly.
Right. So things like pet food and pet toys are historically less stringently regulated than human products.
Right.
So there's been a lot of people concerned about the quality of stuff that their pet is getting, as you have this big millennial trend of everyone is getting a pet now and maybe delaying having kids and treating the pet like a child, as you're saying, and this kind of heavy service touch that Chewy has is definitely playing into that and capitalizing on that pretty well.
Yep. I mean, it is interesting. I mean, there's definitely a platform dynamic here. Maybe there are certain product categories that are less critical, or you could open those up. They're not as stringent, where if my dog eats the toy and he could be at risk, I don't want to take a gamble there. But are there other product categories that you could open up? Probably. The other thing is the services dynamic. And this bullet was part of the PetSmart investment thesis here, where they have a kind of services network. They have a partnership with Banfield. offering full veterinary services in 800 locations. Another couple notable companies from a services marketplace standpoint that are platforms would be WAG and Rover. And I'm going to come back to WAG because it's also gotten a lot of money from our favorite investor, SoftBank. And that is going to bring us to our next topic. We spoke yesterday about Twitter was blowing up. San Francisco Twitter was blowing up about having to explain what a tech company is because they've gotten burned by WeWork. And we were saying, hey, I think, the Bill Gurleys, the Fred Wilsons, the Benedict Evans of the world are kind of throwing shade at some of the later investors in WeWork because they're explaining, how to value 10x multiples and what look at the business model. Don't look if it's a tech company, kind of pretty basic investment 101 kind of stuff. And so you're saying, well, SoftBank definitely took a haircut on WeWork. And are these guys, if you're SoftBank and Benchmark invested early on in WeWork, and then Bill Gurley's explaining what to look for if the valuation is correct, and you've put billions of dollars into WeWork, you're probably not going to be too happy reading those tweets. So another tweet today, I love this guy, Modest Proposal. And so there's a little bit here basically confirming that it wasn't just Adam Neumann's fault. It was actually SoftBank's fault. And they're actually specifically calling out Masayoshi-san, and who's running the SoftBank funds and that whole initiative. So just to read you a little tidbit here, they're explicitly blaming WeWork's investor, particularly Masayoshi-san's SoftBank Group, for the company's problems. Neumann had always been obstinate, and his company was aggressive and a bit undisciplined. But its business had been on a more sustainable path until Sun and SoftBank showed up in 2017 and told Neumann to make WeWork 10 times bigger than your original plan. That's in quotes. That being crazy is better than being smart, and that WeWork wasn't being, quote, crazy enough, end quote. They're trying to make this all about Adam is a lunatic. This is now conjecture on what's happening today. But these people invested, they knew the terms, they knew about the governance issues, and they told this guy, be you, but be 10 times you. What did they expect? Okay. So this kind of sheds some more insight here. So what's really going on? And I think some of yesterday's Twitter, hullabaloo, it was subtly, kind of indirectly, it's all going back to the SoftBank, some of these large Chinese funds that came in later on in WeWork's rounds to give them billions of dollars and say, go, just really burn through cash and don't worry about the economics. And there's a funny book by Reid Hoffman called Blitz Scaling. And it basically says growth matters at all costs. You can screw up every other part of running a business. You can be a bad manager. You can have a horrible culture. You can have basically everything in your company can be really bad, including your P&L. But if you have a lot of growth, everything else will get figured out. And I think the lesson from this is there are limits to that.
Well, I think Reid says this in the Blitzscaling book. Blitzscaling is not for every company.
It doesn't last forever.
There needs to be strong rationale to blitzscale. It should be a constrained period of time to help you get to a destination you want to get to. And that growth and the need to scale quickly should be a key factor in your ability to be successful. So businesses,
and a lot of what his blitzscaling focuses on,
yes,
are platforms,
right?
Not linear businesses.
Right. So what is the benefit of blitzscaling a real estate business? Not sure there is one.
Right. Where is the compounding effect, that network effect that says, okay, well, if I only blitzscale from here to here, then I won't need to effectively do that anymore.
I think WeWork tried to sell a little bit of, we have all this data stuff and there's some kind of network effect
tech
there.
Services
I think typically when the only thing people are selling is data network effects, as they call it, which to me looks a lot like a supply side economy of scale, as opposed to a traditional cross-sided network effect that we see with platforms. I don't find that very compelling, and I don't find that particularly defensible or monetizable or valuable the way that a traditional kind of platform network effect is. So WeWork, I think as we're saying here, basically blitzscaled to hell, didn't probably shouldn't have. And it's not entirely their fault because their investor was pushing them to do that. And one of the things that some of these VC guys have been saying for a long time, and some founders, is SoftBank money is a blessing and a curse, and you don't want your competitor to get it. But if you accept it, there are definitely strings attached to that.
Mm-hmm.
You're giving up, some control in the direction of your company. Because if I have $100 billion fund, I got to find a way to make a return on that. And the only way I'm going to do that is put in, $5-10 billion and have a huge scale from there. It's tough to do.
Right. And then, instead of supporting the guy when everyone says, whoa, this doesn't make any sense, then it was also SoftBank that was the final nail in the coffin, right. to eject Adam as CEO and have him scale back his governance rights and all of these kinds of things. So
there's a lot of money, but it was kind of a Faustian bargain where you're giving some things up to get it.
Yep. So look, there's multiple sides to every story. I think as we peel back this WeWork onion, it just kind of gets a little bit more interesting every day as more information comes out. At the end of the day, though, Adam's going to be fine. Guy's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And maybe he kind of knew this whole thing would blow up, and that's why he was doing all this self-dealing under the table compared to the FanDuel founders who maybe have a couple $1 million. It's a lot of money, but compared to what
hundreds of millions of
dollars.
There was a lot of criticism that he'd cashed out early.
Yes.
And obviously didn't help with the IPO process to have all that self-dealing and things happening.
And again, what it really comes down to, as we spoke about before, is it's the employees that really got shafted in all this, right? At the end of the day, Adam, smart guy, clearly understands what's going on. He protected his own kingdom, personal kingdom, actually made his own personal fortune of a kingdom, and got, basically took the money from I don't want to call him the devil, but took the money that came with a lot of strings to kind of do things that probably didn't make sense in terms of how you'd actually want to grow the business. They thought they were being aggressive, and then they had to throw that out the window and go 10 times as fast. Okay. And then who loses when that doesn't work? It's the employees. Their options are all underwater. Now they have to do layoffs. All the employees that have been there for years thought that they were going to have liquidity finally with the shares.
Get a big payout.
Now there's no liquidity, and they're worth, 25%, 25 cents on the dollar. So, it's unfortunate. And there's a lot of good people that have worked there for a long time and just not going to pan out. So, I don't know, I just have a lot of skepticism when you see non-platform companies, linear companies trying to blitz scale at tremendous scale when they probably shouldn't need to be continuing to blitz scale. Who else does that remind me of? Oh, Netflix. That's right. Okay. Anyway, last topic here. So this company, not huge. It's not public, but we've talked a lot about how there is a dearth of new development platform opportunities, these controlled development platforms, right? If you look at the internet in the 2000s, if you look at smartphones in 08, 09, 2010, and the 10 years that followed, and all of the new startup creation that just occurred, all of the new innovation that occurred on the heels of and on the backs of these large scale development platforms. You've kind of seen that with AWS and Azure. You've kind of seen that with the Salesforce app marketplace. But those are closed development platforms by our terminology, which is saying that they are exposing APIs, and you can build apps and software on top of that. And there's a marketplace, but there isn't an actual hardware component. There isn't a true operating system, which when you look at the scope and range of apps that you can create, it's just much wider and broader, as you have seen with, say, smartphones. And we've spoken about the car as being a future potential arena for that. But what about drones? So yesterday, UPS just announced that they had gotten the first commercial license from the government to operate drones, in a fulfillment capability. I want you guys to watch this Skydio company. It's backed by a lot of the who's who in Silicon Valley. I think they've only raised about $60 or $65 million. So this isn't a mega company yet, But just look at some of this technology in terms of the drone being able to follow you around and take footage of you. So no one's controlling the drone. It just knows to follow you and then uses AI to figure it out. I mean, this is pretty cool. This guy's biking. He's not telling the drone, okay, zoom in. Oh, okay, now go to the right. No, just the thing knows to do this. And I think the question here is, when you look at the application of drone technology and all the different industries that this is just recreational, right? For kind of just cinematography that you want in sports. But when you look at the agriculture industry, when you look at now the fulfillment industry, there are drone startups for healthcare to deliver, if you need medical supplies in Africa and you just can't get to these people, there are drones delivering, blood or critical supplies instantaneously, or certainly an order of magnitude faster than how they had traditionally been delivered. You're seeing drones used to take assessments of either weather damage or roofing jobs for construction companies. You're just seeing a whole slew of different applications that drones can provide value to. And I guess what I'm getting at here is there a development platform opportunity for drones where you could have an ecosystem of third-party developers that are building software that could be industry specific or have a specific type of utility or intelligence that is helping to now inform the drone what to do or what information to scan, and then providing the intelligence to scan the information from the video, get some intelligence from that, and then feed that back into the drone or feed that into other areas. Do you see a kind of development platform play here, Nick, with drones?
I would say definitely, and I think there's a few different arenas in which you could see this pop up. I think one is the consumer kind of stuff we saw, so recreational use of drones. Two would be the commercial stuff, so things like package delivery, medical supply delivery, that kind of stuff. And then three would be military usage. I think the interesting thing to note is that if you look at the smartphone, where a lot of the sensors and things that were part of that, if you look at the internet and how that developed, all of these were at a certain point originally military technologies that then became basically commercialized and became kind of foundational development platforms. Drones follow that path. And I think in terms of the applications, both recreational consumer applications and commercial applications, as well as continued military applications, there's definitely huge development platform opportunities and potentially separately within each of those spheres.
Yeah. There's probably 2 or 3 buckets too. So if we look at Salesforce, what we would say for Salesforce, there's kind of 2 buckets of types of apps. One type of app would be, I'm providing software down to the different users, Salesforce users. So I could be a salesperson out in the field. I could be an ops person, in HQ. And these apps are going to provide, workflow management, different utility for these specific roles that can do things with the data in Salesforce and just make that more efficient or more applicable or whatever that may be. The other bucket of apps are apps that are actually improving the data in your Salesforce account. So cleaning up duplicative data, rinsing it out of incorrect data. There are literally billion-dollar companies, and all these companies are doing, one of them, I forget the name, all it does is help give you the correct location for the prospects or the contacts or the companies that you have in your Salesforce account. Just giving you accurate location information, worth hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. So those would be kind of the 2 buckets there. When I look at drones, what are the buckets we see? I see a bucket for having intelligence that is reading the video footage that's coming in and the other sensory information that's coming off of the drone.
Right.
And then inferring intelligence from that.
So there's companies that do like computer vision stuff, looking at assessing property damage, or looking at, appraising a house and taking photos of that, and then being able to make sense of that, basically visual information to actually output useful data.
Yep, exactly. You can then have apps that are going to help control the actual movement of the drone, right? Or have it work in a certain sequence. You've seen who does this? Maybe IBM, where they're doing kind of like the new version of fireworks shows as they do drone shows, or they did this at the Olympics, right? Where you have drones moving in sequence with one another to have a visual display, right?
Autonomously. And I think that we saw that with the example you showed of the kind of recreational use extreme sports, where there's certain software basically telling the drone how to combine what it's seeing with how it should move. And that's basically kind of an autonomous protocol that gives it a set of instructions on how to act. And there's a lot of different use cases for that, from extreme sports to, again, appraising buildings to, industrial applications to delivering stuff. There's a lot of different ways that the same hardware and operations can behave.
I think that's the third bucket is the pairing the physical, whether that's saying I'm delivering a package or I'm delivering blood, right? Where you're kind of wrapping the drone around this other service or fulfillment or product delivery capability.
Right. Enabling a physical service.
Right. And now it's kind of hooking into that. I mean, you look at those three buckets alone, it's massive. I don't think we've seen a clear player coming out of this who is saying, I'm going to open this up at scale and try to connect both sides of this ecosystem. There are some Chinese drone manufacturing companies that are very mature in their development of drone technologies, and they've started to flirt with this, I think, a little bit in China. I think in the US, some of these Chinese drone companies are now coming under more scrutiny, just with the fact that we have millions of Chinese drones buzzing around the United States. Oh, which guess what? All have a backdoor into the Chinese Communist government. So there's a few interesting dynamics going on here in the drone world, but we're going to dig into this some more, and I think definitely highlight some of the players that could go after these strong drone development platform opportunities. That's it for us today on Winner Take All. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.